Welcome to Class 2 of Beginning Stitches for the Canadian Embroiderers Guild. This week we're doing looped stitches. So we're going to start with something that people might recognize called a lazy daisy, where I've come up and then I'm going to bring my thread down, if not in the same hole, then very close to it. Come up a little ways away. And here's the important part. Catch that loop of thread on the stitch I've just made and tack it down, usually with a relatively short tail. And then when we're doing a lazy daisy, we make a little flower. So we'll do that again, coming back to the center. Come up. Let's go in a different direction this time. If you pull too tight, you can always loosen it. And down. Up and down. Maybe next week I'll figure out how to secure my frame. And down. And avoiding a bigger mess in the center, because when we use a thicker thread, we get a bit more going on. That's okay. And down. Makes a little flower. Okay, well, what if we just do one of those? That lazy daisy then becomes a detached chain. And I might use these as a fill in an entire area. Or what if I don't attach them? So I'm going to go back down, same hole, come up and do it again. And back down in the same hole. And come up again. And back down. Now some people have less than fond memories of chain stitch, because if you pull too hard and you've been very carefully and diligently going up and down in the same hole, it's possible to undo all your hard work. So if you're one of those people, there's a solution. Or if you just want your chain stitch to go in the opposite direction, there's a solution. It's the same one. Reverse chain. In this case, I have my tacking stitch. Oh, as a note, when you finish a chain stitch, it's very important to, just like those detached chains, have a little tacking stitch, sometimes called a tail. Now my tacking stitch, I'm going to go under it and then back down. And then up further along the line I'm going. And underneath my previous stitch and back down. I'm pulling these a little bit too tightly. Here's a trick. If you find that you've pulled your stitches a little too tightly, you can almost always ease them a little bit. So, back, And let's do a couple more of these. Good. And last one. Excellent. So chain and reverse chain. Now, what if, let's go back to doing something like an open chain or a detached chain. We're going to open it. So rather than coming up and down in the same location, I'm going to separate them a little bit, but I'm still holding my thread. And I'm still going to come up in between my thread. So I've spread open my chain stitch. Give it a tail. And this is a fly stitch. And then just like with the chain, I can have a detached fly stitch. And just like with the detached chain, this can be used for a fill if we want to. Those are relatively short tails. What if I want a nice long tail on this next one? A long tail fly. Let's do one more of those. Oop. Again, if you're not paying attention, you pull, you can always pull it up. Very few things in stitching that can't be fixed. I'm going to spin my work. Make it easier for me to go in the other direction. So, I've been doing my fly stitches. And you know what? No. Apologies. I want to go back this way. Because I've been doing my fly stitches. And what if I want to chain them together? Excuse me while I take a moment to extend my thread from my needle just a little. Trouble with working with silk is it gets a little bit tangled on itself. There we are. Okay, so I'm going to chain these together. And just like with the chain stitch, where we used the tail or tacking stitch of one to make the start of the next stitch, we are going to use the tacking stitch to start the next stitch. And then our single detached fly becomes a buttonhole or blanket stitch. Apologies, my thread has gotten tangled. You're going to join me on the other side. Sometimes the thread twists on itself. Thread knots. Okay, so saying it's a buttonhole stitch if it's on the edge of a buttonhole. It's a blanket stitch if it's on the edge of a blanket. And if it's being used in your embroidery, it's whatever you like. All right, and if we're finishing off this particular group, then we will tack it down. Okay, now is where I'm going to pivot my work. Apologies for the... I am not in the best location. But let's just do one more of these because I would like to show what happens if we then alternate which side we go down on for this chained up fly. And what we then get It's a feather stitch. Running out of thread. That's all right. Do a few more. Come now. I'm pretty stubborn when it comes to using up all my thread. Surely we can get at least one more stitch in here. That'll do. And tack that down. So, let's have a look at this week. Again, I'm going to pivot again. Ooh. Sorry. Lazy daisy, single detached chain into a chain stitch and a reverse chain stitch. And if I'm careful about my tension, these should be indistinguishable from one another. Then a fly stitch, a single detached fly, a long-tailed fly, and if we join those up together, we get a buttonhole or blanket stitch, and then if we alternate which side those come from, we get a feather stitch. And so to see the backs, it's not very exciting. Lazy daisy is a lot of stitching back and forth. Those detached chains, it's those long stitches to take you in between your spots. And then chain stitch and reverse chain look the same from the back. Same as those flies. And then into a buttonhole or blanket stitch here. They're just lined up nicely together. And a feather stitch.